So as we're talking, I have 4 or 5 questions for Eric that we're going to have a little bit of a dialogue and we're going to riff a little bit on. And then I have on the app here your questions that are going to come from Slido. So as we're going, we're going to curate them as we always have. But feel free to continue to add them as the conversations are going along, and we'll pick the ones that are going to help the conversation move forward. At the end, we're going to do the one, the kicker is the one from Tech.London, the winner of the Ask Eric competition gets the final question, and it's a doozy. But so we're all ready. You ready to go, Eric?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you good, right? Everybody
All
hear me
right,
back?
awesome.
Outstanding. Okay, so the first question, pretty easy, straightforward. What do you think is right now, how would you describe the status of the lean startup today? You've got a great perspective of where it's been, where it's going. Where is it today?
Well, to be honest, I think I have the worst perspective of all. So for me, lean startup is old news. You know, I have been writing about this since 2008, 2009. The book came out in 2011, and you know, there's been this huge global movement to embrace these ideas. You know, as evidenced by the fact that you're all sitting here, we're having this conversation. But to me, what is really remarkable about the growth of the lean startup community in the last 5 years is how much it has not been led tops down through kind of formal programs and conferences, although, you know, we do our part to create these gatherings. It really is not about the people you see on TV. It is about the people who have been laboring, you know, kind of in obscurity in hundreds of meetups around the world, really trying to advance the state of the art. You know, building companies, using these ideas, you know, sharing perspectives with each other. Those of you who are founders, CEOs, or, you know, really trying to build something new, know how lonely it can be, know how much people expect you to kind of pretend to have all the answers. And so to build a community of folks who, you know, can come together to help each other, to me, that's very powerful.
Is there anything in particular that surprised you about how the community itself has grown, or certain regions or areas or ways that it's grown?
I mean, everything about it has been surprising to me. When I started this journey, I was just a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. You know, that was my life, and I was very, very happy to do that. You know, I figured my whole career would be bound up in a very limited geography and a very limited set of relationships and connections. I was very much in the traditional VC model, the traditional Silicon Valley model, like just like what you see in the movies and on TV. You know, except a little bit less funny. And you know, when I wrote that book, I was really thinking about, okay, look, there seems to be a need for something new here. Here's a set of ideas that make sense to me, you know, as you were hearing a moment ago, from first principles, from the kind of the raw question of what is a startup in the first place, and how would you manage under that kind of uncertainty. And anyway, those are the kind of questions I was focusing on. I wasn't thinking about it as a movement. I wasn't thinking about it as a community. I wasn't thinking about it as something that would be international or cross industry or cross sector. And so to see the ideas spread, I mean, the last 5 years I have been everywhere, you know, you can imagine in business, you know, in every industry and sector, you know, healthcare, energy, high tech, low tech, old school industrial, you know, hyper growth, hot startups, and yeah, plenty of Silicon Valley stuff too, but also government and NGOs, development work. I mean, it's really been remarkable to see the spread, and none of that, you talk about unpredictability, uncertainty, none of that is anything that I foresaw. I feel like I've just been the beneficiary of so many evangelists and just really passionate people who think this is a way to improve the likelihood that their mission comes to fruition.
And it's really got to be exciting. That sounds amazing, like an amazing story. It's got to be exciting to see that work materialize into something that means so much for so many people. And we could tell by the experience here in the room today and in the past 48 hours here and the folks we've worked with, gosh, over the course of the past year, how much that resonates. But now you have something new to drop on people. I don't know if everybody in the room knows this, but the Leader's Guide just came out last week. And I wanted to ask you, Eric, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in pulling together the Leader's Guide and what we can expect from the next book that's going to bring some more insights to an audience like this?
Well, you know, you don't really know what a book is going to be until you write it. That's the truth. But yeah, so last year I launched this Kickstarter campaign for the Leader's Guide. Any backers in the room? You can raise your hands or wave.
Got about 5%, yeah.
Okay, excellent, good. That's perfect. That's the perfect penetration we wanted for this. The idea of the Leader's Guide was to take a bunch of ideas that I have been developing, you know, in my private work as a consultant and kind of in the development of the movement since since the Lean Startup was published, and rather than just take that immediately and do a big, massive book launch and do a mainstream business book follow-up, I felt like that was a little bit hypocritical to just like do a big bang waterfall style development book. So what I did instead was said, okay, let's build a minimum viable product of that book. Let's get a community together. Let's run a Kickstarter campaign. Let's find out, first of all, does anybody even want this thing? And more importantly, let's use the community to test out many of the ideas that will hopefully inform the new book. So that's been what I've been working on the past year. And the ebooks just went out. The physical books are at the printers. And so backers, you will get them soon. I am not even I am not immune to scope creep and the kind of ridiculous production delays that publishing requires. But so better late than never, we have finally shipped. And what'll be interesting to see now is as the community kind of takes the ideas and runs with them, what I'm really interested in is not just what works, but what doesn't work, and what we can learn about these ideas in practice when they're translated through the medium of print versus with me standing right there telling people what I think they should do. So I'm very excited about it, and if all goes well, that will lead into a new, more traditionally published business book that will come out next year. For those of you that missed the Kickstarter campaign, I apologize, but the whole idea was to do a limited run, limited scope MVP, so stay tuned. But for those of you who are in the campaign, thank you very much, and I really look forward to hearing what you think.
Yeah, for those of you who missed the last campaign, be aware for the next one. You never know. You got to be on your toes if you're going to be an entrepreneur, right? So you said something also about things that worked and things that didn't work, and we got. I had a number of questions about that from people in workshops in the past 48 hours. Can you comment a little bit on the importance of experimenting with things that give you positive feedback, as well as those things that give you negative feedback?
Yeah, it's funny because people talk about Lean Startup as a way to contain the cost of failure and to do things more efficiently and cheaply. And the kind of canonical Lean Startup stories people always want to tell is, the old way was you raise all this money and you wait a long time, you launch with great fanfare, and then nobody wants your product. And oops, you really should have figured that out in advance. And that is such a catastrophic failure mode and such a colossal waste of time, energy, and money that I don't mind that that's what people think about. I mean, that is just, to me, that is product development or entrepreneurial management 101, which is don't do the big bang stealth launch, assume you know what's going to happen in the future. But once you purge that kind of waste from your way of working, first of all, you'll see an immediate and unequivocal benefit. So if your organization is still organized around milestone-based, stage gate-based development, then boy, are you going to be in for a treat. But once you get into a more MVP, experimental, iterative style of working, then failures are very common, and they're not really such a bad thing. You stop worrying about how do I prevent failure and start focusing on what's going unexpectedly well. See, the interesting thing about most entrepreneurial stories is that although the founder had some kind of grandiose vision, it wasn't really very precise at the beginning. You can Google this. There's a great interview with Mark Zuckerberg, from the early days of Facebook, I think when they were on 2 or 3 campuses, and he's like a college bro, sitting on a couch at a keg party in Stanford being interviewed by some student video site. And, this is one of the most legendary and visionary entrepreneurs of the 21st century. And, you can sort of see what people saw in him back then, but you can also sort of see why he was easy to dismiss and why you're like, did he really know everything was going to happen? And the truth is, no, he didn't know everything that was going to happen. He had a core insight that was basically right, and he's been very savvy about identifying the things that go unexpectedly well and double down. And there's lots of funny stories, not just about Zuckerberg, but about many of the famous entrepreneurs that even while they were on track to see their vision realized, they didn't totally understand it. And if you remember that famous story about Zuckerberg living in the house in Stanford, when he moved from Harvard out to California, and he had that legendary meeting with Sean Parker. This is all depicted in the movie, in the books that the movie was based on. Many things are inaccurate about those stories, but the basic schema of what was happening in that house, I think, has been pretty well documented. And he and Adam D'Angelo and Dustin Moskovitz and Sean Parker, these are now like 4 of the great entrepreneurial names of our decade, were living in this house together. And of the 4 or 5 of them that were living there, Facebook is blowing up right then as they're there. Only Dustin Moskovitz, who didn't even know how to code, was actually working on Facebook. Adam, Sean, Zuck, they'd all moved on to other things because they didn't think Facebook was going to be that big a thing. And Dustin Moskovitz had to teach himself PHP so that he could add new colleges to the Facebook site because no one else in the house, all these geniuses, weren't actually interested in building it. Anyway, so being able to see what's going unexpectedly well, Dustin Moskovitz now is worth $1 billion, and he really earned it because he was the one who said, guys, there's something unexpectedly good happening here. Don't just take it for granted. Let's double down. And if you want to do a fun homework assignment, go get the book and read it and look up what the other projects they were working on at that time were. Just so you want to get a sense of even the greats don't always call their shots. So I would think for us, when we think about designing experiments, design them so that there's the possibility of that positive surprise.
Super. Wow, that's super amazing. I saw a lot of heads nodding during that story. I think there's going to be some people reading that book. That's really exciting. I bet also that there's a decent number of people here in the room and in the UK and in Europe in general who are saying, I'm not in Silicon Valley, but I want to be a great entrepreneurial success. And given what you know what's going on in Europe and London in particular, do you have any ideas about trends or opportunities or things that people should pay attention to if they're entrepreneurs in this part of the world?
Yeah, it's really too bad because if you don't live in Silicon Valley, you don't get to drink the special water we have here that makes you an automatic entrepreneurial superstar. So, sorry about that. It's funny, you see this in the press, like Silicon Valley is the center of the universe for entrepreneurship, and we have some larger than life personalities. We have plenty of hype. We do a good job of marketing this place as a special place, and I believe it. I live here for a reason. I think it's an amazing place to a startup. But I really don't think entrepreneurship is confined to Silicon Valley or even to Silicon Valley style companies. I think it's a much broader phenomenon, a much more important phenomenon for the world. So a couple things I would say. One, if you're thinking about doing a startup outside of Silicon Valley, embrace the fact that you're not in the echo chamber. Okay, Silicon Valley is a very herd-oriented place. The thing that is hot here changes by the month, and everybody's copying it. And when something gets excited, like there'll be 20 startups that are exactly the same that get funded practically overnight. So don't chase Silicon Valley trends. Do your own thing. And if you're in a startup hub or you're trying to build out a startup hub, focus on making it unique and distinctive based on the skills and personalities and culture of the place that you're in. Don't try to copy. If you want to copy things, copy the principles that have allowed the traditional startup hubs to thrive. Focus on getting creative class type people to want to live there. Focus on getting the entrepreneurs that are successful to stay and to reinvest in the local community. Laud them, celebrate them. Celebrate entrepreneurs more than gatekeepers. So make entrepreneurs the center of your of conversation, not lawyers and VCs and all these other people. And there's lots of books that have been written on this topic. I don't want to belabor those points. The other thing is pay attention to public policy. I feel like when I travel in a lot of regions, especially in Europe, there's not a good recognition of the need for policy changes that support entrepreneurship. So, people don't think about this. I feel like it's kind of boring stuff, but like the bankruptcy code in many countries still has personal liability for failed corporations, right? So as a founder, you could be personally liable for the debts of your company. That makes it harder to start a company because you have to reserve capital for the wind down. I don't have to tell you, you guys know the problem firsthand. Here in California, non-compete agreements are unenforceable. That's not even true in every U.S. state, and yet many states are trying to be the next Silicon Valley, but they don't have that protection firmly in place. So I think what is called for is the development of a pro-entrepreneurship public policy, and this is important globally. It's not really a left-right issue. So traditionally, worker protections would be a desire of the left, but free enterprise and creative destruction would be a desire of the right. So we tend to see people get kind of scrambled about how do you support entrepreneurs. And I think the reason you get scrambled is corporate giveaways and policies that strengthen the hands of companies tend to benefit incumbents over upstarts. So things like non-compete agreements, trade secret rules, bad patent and copyright policies, which are especially bad here in the U.S. Those help incumbent companies both increase their relative power vis-a-vis workers, but also vis-a-vis the upstarts that would like to compete with them. So those are bad. But the second thing you got to think about is when someone becomes an entrepreneur, what were they doing 5 minutes before they made the decision? Right? Occasionally, there's someone like Elon Musk, and they were already an entrepreneur, and so they stayed being an entrepreneur. But the vast majority of people, must be 99% or more, who become entrepreneurs, were not entrepreneurs before. They were immigrants, they were students, they were ordinary workers. They were not captains of industry, generally speaking. So the things that protect those groups and make their economic lives less miserable and more free make it more possible for them to become entrepreneurs in the first place. So that's why crushing student debt like we have here in the US is a huge problem. It's why portable health insurance is so important for countries that don't have it as a state-sponsored guarantee. It's why many priorities, like again, kind of get confused left, right, are important because it make it possible for people to take that entrepreneurial leap. So if I was in a place other than Silicon Valley and I was trying to think about how do I strengthen my entrepreneurial ecosystem, I would really look at those two factors. Look at the cultural aspects of who gets celebrated and how the community comes together, and look at the policy levers that underlie the ability to take a risk and take a chance.
Well, that's super, super powerful. Thanks for sharing that, Eric. I have to tell you, as I was in the room watching when we had the first set of tips, you gave the first set of tips, there are lots of people who are furiously noting them and taking them down. And when you started talking about the second part, I felt like people were just really listening and absorbing that message and feeling the importance and the power of that entrepreneurial revolution that you've got to take home and make your own. So I think that, gosh, I think that just really resonated. So
Yeah. Okay. Good.
we have.
I look forward to us having a global entrepreneur party. If the pirate party can thrive, surely the entrepreneurship party can thrive.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I would join that party. I don't like the parties that we've got so far. So we have a few questions online. It's about time for us to switch to those. So if anybody has been holding off on some of the questions, my phone's been buzzing as these come in. If you've been holding off on some of these questions, go ahead and send them along, because we've got a bit of time to answer a decent number of them. But I'm going to go, actually, and this one got the most upvotes, so it's going first. It actually kind of relates a little bit to the last comment. It says, how can you create your own app for democracy in developing countries?
Well, that's a bold question, and one which I am not qualified to answer. So contrary to what you may have heard, not every single American feels qualified to opine on the entire world situation in every detail. So I don't try to summon the necessary humility to answer that question. I mean, honestly, I love technology. Technology is my life, and I was a computer science major long before I was a tech entrepreneur. And yet, I really feel like the kind of flip answers you hear about an app for this and solving civic society with an app, I don't know. I feel like people are not really taking seriously the scale of challenges in developing, a rule of law, kind of modern style civil society. I think technology can be helpful there, but I would rather, honestly, I would rather you ask that question to activists on the ground and say, hey, I have some technology and UX skills. How could I put them at your service, rather than asking me the question? Because honestly, I don't feel qualified to answer.
Well, that's pretty humble and thoughtful of you. I mean, there's so many tools that people are out there and using, and I would expect that people would take that to heart as well. So the next question I have, let's see. I'm going to go to this one from Anonymous. What are the most important roles in a startup, and how can we ensure they are the right people to be partners?
You need to fire your co-founder, Anonymous. I'm sorry. I don't want to read too much between the lines of your question, but no one ever asks this question unless they're in a serious problem with their startup. So I'm just going to answer the question you didn't ask, which is, if you're asking, you have a problem. If you have a problem, you need to take action. It's only going to get more unpleasant later, and so it's time for them to go. Because honestly, startups are not about roles. They're not about CVs. They're not about resumes. They are about people who have the attitude that their job is to make the company successful, period. And people have different skills and different aptitudes when they come into a startup. So they may have different titles. They may get paid different amounts. I feel like people's salary should be roughly proportional to their market rate, but that doesn't determine their title. Internally, titles you put whatever you want on your business card. It's like I tell people that work for me, You can put Grand Poobah in the universe on your business card if that makes you feel better. I don't care. Your job is to make the company succeed by whatever means necessary. So let's talk about how do you know someone who has that fire, that passion, that intensity? And the answer is really easy. You know it when you see it. Okay, this is not confusing. You know, get to 100 people, you get even at 25 employees. There's like a process for hiring. You have to get more rigorous about it. You have to make sure you're watching out for implicit bias, and there's a lot of important things that have to happen at that stage. But when you're talking about a small startup at the very beginning, you have to find people who you think care enough about the mission to do a good job. And the nice thing about hiring them is it's okay to make a mistake. I've made many mistakes. I've brought several people into startups that I was completely convinced would be an amazing employee number 1, employee number 5, employee number 10, and then just been wrong. And the more you are in denial about being wrong, the more painful it gets. So you just got to get it over with and like have the difficult conversation, give the feedback, be clear about your expectations, but don't procrastinate. Just get it over with.
That's really great advice. That's really great advice. So the next one actually comes from someone, but I actually might need them to give a little bit of clarification just to make sure we get the answer right. This is from Shinny. Is Shinny still here? Shinny? All right, awesome, okay. How can we introduce sustainable agendas in lean startup business models? And I think you mean sustainability in the business, or you mean sustainability in terms of like clean technology and that sort of thing? Business model canvas that's working with sustainability, like sustainable business practices. Okay, just for clarification, is that helpful?
Sure, it's a big question. I can't answer your question about business model canvas. That's not my domain, so I'll let the experts in that topic answer. One of the things that I think gets confused in the conversation around sustainability in business is because lean startup advocates for rapid experimentation and testing, people sometimes think that therefore we are advocates of a kind of a short-termism philosophy. And therefore, do whatever, throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks, do whatever you want. And believe me, I have tried living that mantra in my past life, and it's awful. Pretty soon, if you're chasing clicks and whatever makes the numbers go up and to the right, you'll be selling pornography before you know it. It's terrible. So I don't think that's right. And I think a lot of the sustainability problems we have in our world really come down to an issue of time horizon. In the US, we are very much enamored with this idea that companies exist to maximize shareholder value. And in fact, some people even think that is the legal standard to which companies should be held. That idea, I think, is very foolish. But even if you took it seriously, it still doesn't answer the question of on what time horizon. So the question is, do I want to maximize the value of what my current shareholders exist, today? Or am I trying to build an enterprise that will last and will create value over the long term? And I think most of the entrepreneurs that we all admire have that long-term philosophy. It really is the underpinning of successful entrepreneurship, but this is not a new idea. If you look at books about the Toyota production system, what made lean manufacturing possible at Toyota was that there was their philosophy of long-term thinking that is the foundation of their management practice. So to me, if we want to see more sustainability in the world, we have to ask ourselves, what are the incentives and systems that cause people to act in a short versus a long-term way? And we see that manifest not just in poor safety practices on oil rigs, but you see it in startups that are designed for hype rather than the creation of customer value. It's all about the short term, the quick hit, the built to flip. That's our enemy in business and in the sustainability movement, for that matter. So I think what we need to be doing is looking at systemic reforms at the corporate governance level, at the disclosure level, at the management compensation level that change the incentives towards more of a long-term outlook. And that will bring a lot of these problems along with them. So just to give one concrete example, I talk in the Lean Startup about the law of sustainable growth, which is a situation where new customers come from the actions of past customers, right? So you take the money you make from a past customer, reinvest in customer acquisition, or in a viral situation, you have past customers that transmit the idea for the product to the next customer as a necessary side effect of usage. Or in a kind of a more high retention type business, the new customers are the old customers returning at a very high rate. So you see compounding growth of your word of mouth. Each of those models is a mathematical formula that says whether the growth you have is a one-time short-term phenomenon or is based on real sustainability. Now, I called it the law of sustainable growth not because I wanted to put on my, kumbaya environmental hippie outfit and go commune with nature, but because I really think that this dichotomy between business and the environment is a false one for the reasons I've laid out, and that if businesses could be built around sustainable principles across the board, they would be both more profitable and more environmentally conscious. Here's what's interesting. So I have tried to teach the law of sustainable growth and this like very mathematical, very simple model for customer growth. This is a customer acquisition and retention mathematical model. It's kind of a big part of what spawned the growth hacking movement, and it's a very powerful set of kind of conceptual vocabulary for thinking about growth. Even now, even after all these years and many, many, many successful examples of this being adopted, I still find it difficult to teach it to most companies because most companies are simply too short-term oriented and they don't care. They're happy to look at gross numbers like week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter growth rates. And it's like, you always ask them, hey, the fastest growing kind of business is a Ponzi scheme. You sure you don't want to do that? And I swear to God, most managers have to think about it. And I think that tells you everything you need to know about our global business culture.
Do you think that's moving towards a place where it's going to change, or do you think that's more of the revolution that needs to happen from entrepreneurs to actually drive that sort of change in the mindset of a mass of business leaders?
No change is inevitable. All change requires entrepreneurs. So this is no exception.
Second call to arms for you guys in the room, all right? It's super. Good? All right, great. So Eric, we've pummeled you with a couple pretty hard questions. So I've got like what I think is a softball, and I wouldn't normally ask it, except for the fact that it's got a lot of upvotes. So I guess everybody says you've been working really hard, and we want to give you a little bit of a break. The question is from Dominic, and it says, your build, measure, learn approach creates great products fast. Do you think it can be used for other areas such as strategy and business planning?
You made it sound like it was going to be an easy question, but there's a surprising amount of depth here. Okay, first of all, I dispute the premise of the question that build, measure, learn leads to great products fast. It just leads to great products, period. How fast it is depends on how good your experiments are. It's like saying science leads to conceptual breakthroughs fast. It's like, no, science leads to conceptual breakthroughs, period. The benefit is that they're true, not that you got them quickly. Now, it's like asking, is science faster than astrology? It's like, well, that's not really the right question. So, okay, so I dispute the premise of your question. Second, what does it mean to build a product? What is the definition of the word product? I feel like most people have a layperson's definition of product, which is, a thing in a box, a thing you buy. But if you give this even 5 minutes of thought, you're going to realize that definition of product can't possibly be right. Because first of all, Facebook makes a product and you don't buy it and it doesn't come in a box. But also think about like a great consulting company that doesn't make any software, but they still sell something that you buy. What are you buying from them? You're buying their expertise. They're buying their time of the people that help you. It's not really clear what are you buying. I mean, as soon as you get into as soon as you leave the world of the tangible, the world product becomes very difficult. You buy a can of soda. What's the product that you bought? Well, you got a thing in a box. You got a physical drink. So you feel like, okay, that is something very simple. But most soda companies are arranged as an IP holding company that licenses the formula to create the soda and the trademarks and the name brand that makes it Coca-Cola versus generic cola. And then a separate bottler and distributor who actually makes the physical thing. So what's the product of Coca-Cola? Is it the thing you bought in the store, or is it this nebulous, confusing IP patent portfolio? It's actually a very deep question. So my answer to this question is that the product is anything that the customer experiences. I think product should be defined in terms of the customer's experience. So whether it's a consulting engagement, whether it's a physical product, whether it's some kind of strange strategy-based IP licensing, thing. And of course, in a typical value chain, there are multiple products sold to multiple customers. So the right way to think about the Coca-Cola example is that the Coca-Cola company sells a product to the distributor who sells a product to the end customer. And of course, I've left out the retailers and the shippers and the many, many other steps of that value chain. But you understand that there's multiple products and multiple customers that go through that whole chain. Now, I can answer your question. If my job is to create a new IT system for my coworkers to make payroll more efficient, or to do resource planning, an ERP, or the simplest thing of all. I was once working with a team. Their job was to figure out when people in the company should get a new computer. This IT function, their job is they're in the procurement department, they buy computers for employees. And I remember I was sitting on stage doing kind of live coaching with this team in front of like several thousand employees of the company. It's a big company. And they came up and they presented their new plan to get computers on the desks of engineers. Engineers would get a computer every 2 years, but everybody else would get a company every 3 years. And if you were in an unimportant function like marketing or something, you get one every 4 years. Some kind of plan, whatever. And I sat there and I said, "Great. How do you know that this plan is going to work?" And they didn't really even understand my question. They said, "What? I don't understand what you mean." I said, "Well, why are we doing this plan?" He said, "Well, it's important to improve productivity, for people to have the right kind of computer." I said, "Great, how are we going to measure that?" I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, you make a product. Your product is this policy on when someone should get a new computer. It has cost associated with it. You get paid a salary to make this policy. It is supposed to drive savings in productivity greater than the cost that it's going to cost the company to implement this policy. What experiments are we going to run? What's the MVP? What's our build, measure, learn feedback loop?" This team had never thought of themselves as making a product or having customers, and therefore they'd never thought about applying build, measure, learn. But once they did, they realized, hey, wait a minute, this is a business plan full of untested assumptions. And I could tell you story after story after story of teams just like that. I was just working with an HR team. Their job is to help the company do performance evaluations for all employees, and they treated that like a startup with a product and build, measure, learn. I've done this with labor contracts and strategy, all kinds of strategy sessions. Strategy is one of the most nebulous concepts in business, and therefore very amenable to build, measure, learn type experimentation. So I would say if you do anything that affects another human being, you might benefit from thinking of the thing that you do as a product and the person that is affected as a customer, and see where it takes you.
Super. That's really great. Okay, so we got about 7 minutes by my count left. So I've got time for a couple more questions. Let's see. There's a couple. One just says, "I love your book, Eric." That's like, it's not a question, but I like what you got to say here. So
love that question. Thank you, sir or madam.
That was from Anonymous. Anonymous is pretty busy today. So here's one, a good one. "The advice and support offerings for startups is totally overwhelming. What does Lean Startup offer that is not just obvious but worthwhile?"
Oh, the best part of Lean Startup is you can ignore everybody's advice. Isn't that great? Of course, you have to take our advice first. But after you take our advice, then you get to ignore everybody else's advice. Isn't that great? Yeah. Listen, when I was an entrepreneur, I hated the vast majority of startup advice that I received. I just found it so irritating. I would go to a startup conference, and there would be like 10 speakers, and they would have 10 mutually contradictory, totally inane, like complicated and confusing systems of thought that could not be reconciled. And if I was unlucky enough to be there with one of my co-founders, and if that co-founder was unlucky enough to be the CEO, they would sometimes turn to me and at the end of the day and say, "That was great. We should totally do that." I say, "What's that?" He said, "All of it. Let's do it all. Everything we heard today, let's implement. That's your job. Go make it happen." And I would want to kill myself because it's like, how do I implement 10 mutually contradictory things? It's crazy. So here's the way out of that trap. Okay, first of all, don't be an advice junkie. Don't go to conferences and read blogs 24/7. Don't become an entrepreneurship fetishist. Be widely read enough that you know the basics of the core theories. And you pick the ones you think are most important. I'm not here shilling for Lean Startup. You could decide to read a disruptive innovation book. You could read just Ben Horowitz's book. You could read, just pick 4 or 5 of the best, just to be basically literate in the state of the art. Then adopt a framework that works for you, that is at least based in the scientific method, that allows you to test out ideas in a systematic way. And then whenever someone gives you advice, apply the framework, run the experiment, figure it out. And so now I'm not telling you to adopt Lean Startup. I'm asking you to experiment to see if Lean Startup really works. If it doesn't work, don't do it. And people get into these holy wars about like, does this count as lean startup? And I'm like, well, it's easy. Lean startup stands for whatever works. We just happen to think this set of things work. But if you are the one who proves that our whole system is wrong and there's a Copernican revolution that needs to happen here, like no one will be more eager to champion it than I will. And anybody who says we need to ignore this evidence because it doesn't comport with lean startup ideology or official dogma should be excommunicated. Except we don't have a religion, so I can't excommunicate anybody. But the point is, try it for yourself, run the experiment, see what works, and then tell everybody else to shut the you know what up.
Super. Another great tip that's not actually. Okay, let's see. Sorry. We have 2 questions left, so I was actually looking between these to say which one was a little better for you. I'm going to read this one from John. It says, Lean is now established methodologies for startups, yet enterprises still struggle to adopt them. Will they ever catch up with lean startups?
It's funny you say that because I still feel like we got a lot of entrepreneurs out there to convince. So, I appreciate the premise of your question that we've already won the battle, but I think the battle hasn't even really been joined yet. So you got to remember the world of business is just so incredibly huge. I travel the world now and I meet managers and entrepreneurs everywhere. And like every day practically, I meet someone who just heard about Lean Startup today. There's probably some people in the audience who read the book yesterday and was like, oh, there's a conference coming up. Maybe I'll stop by and check it out. And that's not just about Lean Startup. I meet with managers who like basically are not convinced that the internet is here to stay. They're open to it. They're thinking about it. Is mobile really going to be a thing? It's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a thing. You're going to need to check that out. But like, there's people who have not yet understood the theory of disruptive innovation and don't use the terms correct. Business is frighteningly large. So I've worked with a lot of big companies, and I've become a convert to the idea that big companies can change if they want to implement these ideas. I have done it with companies, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, multi-100,000 people, 10 years old, 100 years old. It doesn't seem to make any difference. Where there's a will, there's a way. If the CEO wants to see this change happen, it can happen, period. But when I meet with companies as a consultant, I always tell them the same thing. It's like, listen, and I'll give you the same answer I give them when I get this question about whether companies can or can't do it. I don't really care. Here's the thing. As a consumer, as a citizen of the world, it doesn't matter to me whether today's companies live or die. It really doesn't. I know for sure that the products I use 10 or 20 years from now, if I'm lucky enough to be still alive then, certainly, God willing, the products my children will use, they will be built according to highly iterative, customer-centric UX principles. It's gonna be how the winners operate in the future. So that's awesome. And we live in a globalized age, so I don't have to be worried that, someone in Germany will be the next Tesla and I won't get to drive a Tesla because I live in the US. Like, those days are over. So the best product globally will always win. These principles allow you to build the best product. Therefore, people who use this product over the long run will be the winners. Awesome. Hey. So when I talk to companies, I say, listen, if you adopt these principles, you can be the leader. You could be the one that survives. You could be the one that rides this wave to success. Or you cannot, and my good buddies on Santo Road are currently funding competitors who will eventually take you down. And listen, we might not get you on the first try. We might not get you on the second try. We might not get you on the 10th try. We ought to get you on the 50th try. But, remember the story of the dinosaurs and the mammals? Right, the law of large numbers says we will take you down eventually. So best of luck to you. You see why I'm not a very popular consultant. But I really think that's the truth.
Well, you're popular in this room, that's for sure. And sometimes you got to tell people truth that they definitely don't want to hear because it's the best medicine and it's your best truth. And that's being genuine and being honest, which I think everybody appreciates. So unfortunately, we've come down to our last question. And this is the one from Tech.London, the Ask Eric winner. And this one basically says, which are some of the best companion tools for the lean startup approach?
Okay. This is also a very deceptively simple question. It's actually quite complicated. And I want to answer it a couple different ways. The first is, I am officially neutral among vendors in the lean startup space. It's very important. I believe the lean startup community should be a big tent, So there are no official tools of the Lean Startup. There are no official consulting companies of the Lean Startup. Nobody has the exclusive right to do anything with my trademarks, IP. We are very broad licensors of these ideas. And so there are many, many different really interesting tool companies, both in the like experiment tracking space, in the analytics and A/B testing space. There are all kinds of interesting experiments. So go forth and Google to learn all about them, and don't say that Eric endorsed one over the other. I am not a participant in the Canvas wars. Okay, I do not endorse one Canvas over the other. I do not excommunicate people that use the wrong Canvas. Heck, I personally don't use the Canvas at all in my own work. So, whatever tools work for you, I endorse heartily. But let me close with a little parable. I think about this a lot because I feel like there's a tremendous amount of money to be made selling Lean Startup in a box. And I can't tell you how many companies come to me and ask me for, hey, could you just build a piece of software that would solve all my Lean Startup problems for me and force people to learn and do it right? And I always think back to an event that I was not personally able to witness. I was far too young, but think back to the advent of lean manufacturing. We started after World War II in the 40s and 50s, but it didn't really reach American consciousness in a big way until the 80s. Because what happened in the 80s was globally, Japanese manufacturers, especially Toyota, started to compete with American companies, and it caused a huge panic. I don't know if this was international news, if anyone knows this, but in my childhood in the US, we went through a phase of Japan panic. The Japanese, because of their homogenous culture and Yakuza style this, and it was full of racial orientalism. It was a very ugly episode in American life, of which I'm sad to say we've had many. But we were afraid. And an interesting thing happened during that time. Toyota really took the lead here, but many Japanese companies were very open about sharing how lean manufacturing worked. They didn't believe it was their proprietary information. They thought it was the birthright of all humanity to work in this better way. And I think they were partly feeling that they had taken ideas from the United States, in particular ideas of Ford and Deming, and applied them to develop the idea in the first place. So people like Taiichi Ohno and Shigeo Shingo were very generous in giving intellectual credit to their ideas, to their forebears, an example I think we should all aspire to emulate. So at that time, if you wanted, and you can still do this today, anyone can go to Japan and tour a Toyota factory, and they will teach you about lean manufacturing, excuse me. And many American auto executives did this pilgrimage and went to Japan, and you could just now picture your typical chauvinistic 80s American manager at General Motors. Can you just conjure up this image for a moment? Is forced to schlep to Japan, of all places, to learn about how Toyota does better manufacturing than they do. They show up and they would get an orientation into the tenets of lean manufacturing. And if you've ever read any of Toyota's actual publications or any of the original lean manufacturing guys like Taiichi Ohno and Shingo, their work is very, it's not so transparent what they mean at the very beginning. It's full of euphemisms and kind of statements of philosophy before they talk about any specific techniques. Drove me crazy too the first time I read those books. But the key idea in Toyota is respect for people is one of the key pillars, right? Every defect is a treasure. One of my favorites is no problems is a big problem. So it's just these philosophical ideas about work. Taiichi Ohno was an advocate of what he called autonomation, which is automation with a human touch, which said that you shouldn't put robots in charge of human beings, but you should allow the humans to co-create their work environment with the robots. It was very ahead of its time. Okay, so you should imagine this American auto executive who's sitting there in this office being like, respect for people, what's this Zen crap I have to sit here and listen to, like just totally tuned out. They'd be on their smartphone, except this is before smartphones, right? So then they take the factory tour. Now, compared to American factories at that time, Japanese manufacturing, especially at Toyota, was a gleaming temple of automation. These factories were beautiful and clean. They had way, way, way less inventory. That's where the term lean comes from originally. There's just not as much crap sitting around. They looked and felt noticeably different from American factories. And so you could just imagine what's going on in this guy's mind. It's like, okay, I got it. Forget the Zen crap. Robots. Japan was a huge early adopter of robotics in manufacturing way before we. So they just sit there these tours. They're like, I got it, robots. We need way more robots. So he goes back from his tour. Does he tell his colleagues about this respect for people and the importance of every defect? No, of course not. He goes back and says, boss, we got to invest billions of dollars in robots. And in fact, GM and Ford and all the American companies, they spent a lot of money in the 80s and early 90s, massively automating and installing robots everywhere in every factory, for which they got almost no productivity benefit. It was just unbelievably bad, these investments. It just went really badly. And when the first wave of Japanese lean senseis came to America, after The Machine That Changed the World and lean thinking and that kind of whole wave of books started to popularize the theory of lean manufacturing in the US, the first thing that these senseis would have to do is rip all this automation out and turn this, like a number of fancy ERP systems that cost millions of dollars to develop, that these senseis were replaced with a whiteboard. It was really shocking. Anyway, I tell you this story just to say mindset is everything. Philosophy and theory is everything. You gotta understand it. And then you have to be able to put it into practice. So this is not an ivory tower, sit in your room and intuit the philosophy by communing with the Platonic forms. This is an applied science. But you got to get it right, and no amount of robots will help you. So when you're looking for tools for lean startup, ask yourself, do I have a tools problem or a mindset problem? If you have a mindset problem, then you're approaching things in the wrong way. The tools should support the change that you have already accomplished through your management practice and culture. It is not the engine to drive that change, as counterintuitive as that may sound. Don't be the robots guy, okay?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, that's a way to finish with a bang. Thanks so much, Eric, for what a great story. And let everybody, I would like to thank you on behalf of everyone in the room. Let's give him a round of applause. Thanks, Eric, for your time. Always great.